Welcome back to Native Tongues, your favorite podcast where we chat with writers and musicians about where they call home and how that place influenced their voice. I'm your host, Aaron Palmer, and I'm joined as always by my friend Ken Hall. If you like what you're listening to, take a second to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and go ahead and share it with a friend. We'd love that. Now let's get to this week's guest. We were lucky enough to speak with another very insightful and intelligent person. There must be another Native Tongues out there because I don't know why they keep saying yes to us. This woman is a political correspondent for NPR, and she recently released a memoir titled The Exvangelicals, Loving, Living, and Leaving the White Evangelical Church. It's the story of her upbringing in the evangelical community and how she decided to part ways with it as an adult. It's a fascinating read of a blind faith insular world and how not only someone can come to terms with their surroundings and accept a different viewpoint, but then also to go on and start a career in journalism in the search for truth. She was lovely to talk to, so let's welcome journalist and author Sarah McCammon.
We're getting ready for the RNC and then the DNC. And so it's kind of crazy town right now, but
I'm sure.
yeah.
Well, ironically, what we were just talking about is I think I saw that you'll be in North Carolina this weekend.
Yeah. Are you going to be at Wild Goose?
I am not going to be at Wild Goose. I've never heard of Wild Goose, but I was looking at Wild Goose to be like, what is this festival? It looks cool. Have you been there before?
No, I've heard good things about it. I've always kind of been interested in going and they invited me. So
Very
it
cool.
seemed like a good time. Yeah.
It looks like sort of middle of nowhere, North Carolina. And so I was like, wonder where that is, Union Grove. Let me see here. So I brought up the Google Maps thing and I was lamenting to Aaron that the cover picture. So, Google, you Google it and then it brings up a little picture. That's like, here's Union Grove.
Yeah.
Well, I will share it with you just so you can see.
Oh, great. Am I going to be
you'll know what to look
more
for.
or less excited about this experience?
I'm not sure where you land on like sort of farm equipment and or tractors and or something. This is legitimately the first picture that you see. So like, here's the map and this is Union Grove. And I was like,
that's hilarious.
I'm sure it's somebody's like car and there's some sort of machinery and whatnot. So
I'm from Kansas City and I was like an agriculture reporter in my first public radio. I'm not from a farm at all, but like I covered ag in my first public radio job in Nebraska. So I've like driven a tractor for a story.
Nice.
And when I was a little younger, I think one of the last times I went camping with my kids was when my second one was a newborn. And we literally spent the whole night, like with me, like kind of cradling him in the sleeping bag. He was like maybe 4 months old.
Sure.
And so I haven't done a lot of camp. I mean, I like it enough, but like I like it more mostly like if a man is with me to build the tent.
We have a friend that I've camped with like many times and he wouldn't be ashamed, Brian Whitlock. I'm like, if you can get a Brian Whitlock to camp with you, do that because you need somebody that can come and like he makes kindling,
do the work.
Fires, he does.
Yeah.
I don't mind the hiking and I'll help, but that's it. So anyway, for Wild Goose, I was like, I'll come, but I'm not camping.
Okay. I was going to ask if you're like really buying in and doing the whole thing.
No, I mean, I would maybe be into it if I had like a whole week to come and be part of it, but I'm just coming as a speaker. And then I literally have to get up the next morning and go to Charlotte and fly to Milwaukee. And so I can't mix. Like I can't take literally my like $3,000 radio equipment into a tent.
Right. Fortunately, I think the Four Seasons was just out of frame in that picture.
Right. That's probably it was actually next door to the Four Seasons. That's what they were trying to tell you.
I am staying at like it's like a courtyard, like something that's fine. It's fine.
Right.
Anyway. But you guys probably don't want to talk about that.
That's actually the kind of crap we talk about. So
that's right. You've set your expectations too high. Yeah, we can come back to farm equipment. Actually, you know what? Before we go to other stuff, I do have a question about that. Like, what do you cover in agriculture reporting?
Oh, I mean,
you did.
It's been a number of years.
Many years
I mean, like, should one get into agriculture reporting? What does that cover?
I actually want to go back to agriculture reporting because it's a lot less stressful than what I do.
Yeah, I can imagine.
No, it's like a lot of it is policy. Like, so obviously you cover farm policy. I was at Nebraska Public Radio. And so, and we had a really, 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 really small team, like 2 full-time reporters was it. And then some freelancers. Yeah, Omaha had their own station, so our jurisdiction was basically Lincoln and the western part of the
Okay.
college stuff, and then ag. And so my beat was actually ag and environment, which was really interesting and which were closely connected issues, of course, because
Sure.
agriculture means a lot of land use, water quality impacts, even some air quality impacts, stuff like that. So I had a lot of like latitude about what I wanted to cover. I got really nerdy about covering water issues. And so I did a lot of stories about farmers and, fighting over water rights and fighting with environmental advocates over water because, there's only so much, especially like the western 2/3 of Nebraska are really dry. You might regret asking me about this. We're not recording yet, right?
We're recording all of it. So
yeah.
So
yeah.
you're in.
Well, I mean, fine. I don't mind saying
it's Erin's job to edit it and make it all sound really interesting, like scintillating conversation.
Yeah,
so.
I don't mind saying I may have, in my 20s, in my wayward youth, once at a party smoked a joint and then started talking about water as like a metaphor for everything.
Yeah.
And my then husband appropriately was like, stop. Because it was like really, it was like nonsense. But to me, it was like, so like all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, like water's the prism through which you can understand like who's important and what priorities are. Anyway, that's what so much of politics is though. It's about like whose voice wins, like whose priorities get heard, who gets allocated stuff.
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole thing of like the haves, the have-nots, and who gets to decide who gets what and all that.
Yeah, and which competing priorities people collectively decide to weigh as, because you can't have everything. And anything you do has almost always some kind of drawback or unintended consequence or just cost. So
sure, constant, huge negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we start at the beginning? I gotta be honest, I was infuriated reading your book because
at me?
No, not at you at all.
I mean, people have been.
No, I thought you had a great perspective and it was really well written. It was surprisingly well written from the topic that it's approaching.
Thank you. I mean,
I'll circle back around. I guess that'll make more sense in a minute. So conservatism, like religion and all the politics here just get me like riled up,
It's a trigger for him.
Such a trigger.
Triggered about the, as soon as you start getting into like clearly the evangelical sort of nature of things, especially.
Yeah.
Do you run into that a lot?
Remind me, did you guys grow up evangelical? And I'm sorry, I should have checked the job description before I jumped on this, but I really literally came from 2 interviews back to back, 3 for work to this. And I forgot to remind myself. So you guys are a blank slate. Like, do either of you have a background in this world?
We were actually hired to bring you back into the church. So.
yes. We'll be meeting in Union Grove. I'll be the one next to the big tractor. No, not at all. And it's best not to look us up too soon, or otherwise you might not be here.
I looked you up when I agreed to do this, but it's been a couple of months.
Make sure we're real people, not total creeps.
Yeah. I was raised Catholic up until probably 7th, 8th grade, and then my mom was like, "Yeah, we're not doing that anymore." So we just kind of faded out of it, and that was it for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Jewish. So I was bar mitzvahed at 13, and then I was given the choice afterwards to continue with Sunday school or not. And I was like, free Sundays, peace out,
Yeah.
I didn't really think about it much at the time. And then I grew up in a pretty like reformed household. So we did the high holidays, and I've just gone to temple less and less over the years. And now I am strongly anti-organized religion.
All right. Well, that helps. Now I know.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
There you go.
But where I did dip my toe into this world was, so I grew up here in Baltimore, and I went to college probably close to where you're going for the, I keep wanting to say Goose Chase.
Wild Goose
Festival. Thank you. That's right. It was like Wild Turkey.
Yes.
So in Brevard, North Carolina, like just outside Asheville.
Okay.
And kind of sight unseen is like the buckle of the Bible Belt. And I had never experienced that until I was there, when I saw people waving Bibles in the air, screaming at the Gay and Lesbian Alliance, which, that's what it was called at the time. Mm. And I had a class where a girl laughed at me for believing in dinosaurs. This was
a secular, non-religious college, right? Or
Yeah.
You did, or did you accidentally stumble as a Jewish guy
Right.
into an evangelical college?
I had a friend who did that. Went to
Really?
Liberty. Yeah, went to Liberty. Didn't really know what he was getting into. So.
Didn't know what liberty was?
So it didn't last long.
Yeah. So I experienced all of that firsthand. It was not a religious college at all. In fact, my freshman year, our science teacher, we had like a biology paper to do. And I remember her saying, if anyone turns in a paper on creationism, you will get an F because that is not what I'm asking for,
Yeah.
whether you believe it or not.
Wow.
She'd seen some things, it sounds like.
Yeah. Seriously.
Yeah. So I guess that was when I became interested in that whole world too, just because it was so foreign to me. I didn't understand it. I wanted to know like what drove people to get there, especially younger people too. And so I've researched and I've studied a lot, and it's just been of interest to me. So that was what drove me to your book originally.
Well,
And I think you did a good job of explaining how you're brought up to think that way, in this like closed community, that there is one way of thought. I don't know how close you still are to it, because I'm trying to like mince words right now and not offend you.
I mean, you read the book, right?
Yeah, yes.
I mean, I'm not, obviously I'm not evangelical anymore, and that's part of it. And the book is really about that. I mean, it talks about many different experiences, people, moments, ideas that entered my life as I grew and broadened my perspective, and not just broadened my perspective. Like, I think sometimes that phrase is used in a way that's like, well, I just opened my mind and I took things in, but it's also like to understand that your current perspective is missing things. Like, it's
Right.
Like there's stuff that's just not there, or that's been misconstrued. And so the book is kind of organized around a lot of those moments and things, and then obviously in conversation with a lot of other people who kind of walked a similar path.
So
Yeah, I like
you
that.
grew up in the 80s,
Mhm.
80s, 90s,
Mhm.
with like normal culture too. Like, so how is that viewed, or how do they balance that out? Like when you're this sort of insular community, like I'm just saying it's
Yeah.
everywhere. You see all this stuff. And of course it's easy to be like, well, look at the crazy sinners up there doing that's the fall of society. But it's not all that, there's obviously normal science. There's Bill Nye the Science Guy or Mr. Wizard or stuff like that would be like on kids shows.
Sure. And I mean, some of it did sort of trickle in, right? But at the same time, I always want to say like every family was different and had different rules. But like in my family, it wasn't like I wasn't exposed to pop culture, but it was just kind of very carefully curated. So TV was very limited, which, I mean, I think we understand now in general, like screen time limitations
Good
are not a
idea.
bad thing, but it was
Right.
also like, it was always sort of being filtered through the evangelical lens. Like, does this, is this something that's safe? I talk in the book about, like my mom letting me watch PBS and children's programming, but like actively
close
sort
eye
of
on it.
countering some of the things she was hearing that didn't align with our worldview. Right. And then there were things I just wasn't allowed to watch. Like I wasn't allowed to watch Smurfs, which was apparently a common one for evangelical kids.
Really?
Uh,
Why?
That
Oh,
made me
yeah.
laugh. And Captain Planet also.
Yeah,
Well,
I
Captain
mean,
Planet, I understand.
Smurfs was like, I guess some people thought that they were demonic. I don't know why. Like, I didn't make the rule.
Because there was one woman and 1,000 men.
I don't think it, I honestly don't think it had anything to do with that. There was somehow somebody got how these things are, especially pre-internet, like even things would spread word of mouth, kind of like urban legend type stuff. And so, I mean, if you have any evangelical listeners, I'm sure some of them will have heard this too, that like Smurfs are demonic or bad for some reason. So we couldn't watch them.
Okay.
Educational stuff was okay, but like we were told that anytime evolution came up, it was kind of laughed at and dismissed as bunk. And then of course I had, my whole Christian school curriculum countering all of it. The only thing we could really watch without like restrictions or monitoring or approval was the Christian channel.
The lamest channel.
Did have one. Hey, I liked the cartoons. They were kind of fun.
Did they have like the claymation, what is it, Davy and...
Yes. Actually, I'd totally forgotten about that. But how do you know about that? Is that just a thing that everybody knows about?
Maybe? I don't...
Yeah. No, I think we watch those sometimes on that channel.
Okay.
I've definitely seen that. Davy and Goliath.
I want to say it's Goliath, but I feel like it might have been something else.
It's Davy and Goliath.
Okay.
Isn't it? Maybe it's not. Didn't he have a dog named Goliath, but it was like still kind of Christian? I don't know. It's been a long time.
Something along those
I haven't
lines.
thought about that show in probably 30 years. But yes, so it was carefully curated, and then like, lots of rules about what movies we couldn't see. My parents would read like Focus on the Family's publication for advice about which ones were safe. And
so Focus on the Family, for those who were not brought up in that was like magazine, right?
so it was a big organization,
Okay.
still is based in Colorado. It started out in California, moved to Colorado. The founder is James Dobson, who
Oh,
many
that name
people
came
have
up once. Yeah.
heard of.
Mhm.
Yeah. Very famous psychologist, started out as a psychologist who was doing kind of like, family and parenting counseling and writing, started a radio show that got really popular, wrote a bunch of books, and then kind of moved into the political sphere. He is still alive. He is not with Focus on the Family anymore. He's still doing similar stuff today. But his organization was hugely influential in like the evangelical milieu of my childhood. And so, a lot of what we could and couldn't do, believed, thought about was filtered through that organization in one way or another.
Interesting.
Yeah. So what was surprising to me is the fact that you've stepped away from this so comfortably and are able to talk about it openly. And it was fairly recent that you've like completely removed yourself from the whole culture, right?
Not really that
Or
recent.
did the threads really start to pull like at a younger age and was more definitive?
One reviewer said that I left because of Trump, and that's absolutely not true. Like that
No,
had
it seemed like it was way
nothing
before
to
then.
do,
Yeah.
to do.
Did that reviewer not read your book?
It's possible, but the review was fine otherwise. I just was like, that's not what I said. And I think it made it
Yep.
pretty clear. Like I probably stopped being an evangelical. I kind of gradually like tried a bunch of different churches after college. But I probably really stopped around age 24, and I'm 43 now. So it's been a long time.
Yeah.
But, I've continued to kind of be interested in the movement, pay attention to it as a, someone who grew up that way, and also as
Sure.
a journalist covering
Mhm.
politics that comes up. And when I encountered the word Exvangelical, which was started as a hashtag coined by this podcaster and writer named Blake Chastain, in which I heard in the course of some of my reporting on Trump, I was just sort of intrigued because this idea of like, for so much of my life, from like 23, 24 until 34 or so, when I started covering the first Trump campaign. So there's like a 10-year period there where I'm really not in the evangelical world. I'm also not really reporting on it, per se.
Mhm.
But I had this sense that like I had come from a specific subculture. And I would often, as I got to know people, explain myself in that way. Like, I'm sorry, I missed that movie or that moment in pop culture. I grew up evangelical. There was a lot I wasn't allowed to see and do. Or like
Yeah.
people would, talk about prom. And I'm like, I didn't go to prom. I went to Christian school, So there were just like little things that I felt were different about me. And there was a certain experience that I had had that was different than the average American experience.
Yeah.
And I knew like from talking to other people who'd grown up like I did, that a lot of people kind of had this sense of there's something that's sort of different or that you've missed.
Mhm.
But then to hear the word Exvangelical and I started sort of paying attention to the conversations people were having at that moment, 2015, 16 really, around what it meant to be evangelical in that moment. And I was like, okay, I resonate with a lot of the themes people are discussing, because they were talking about Trump, but they were talking about so much more than Donald Trump.
Yeah.
For those 10 years, like, did you think there was like a community around that in a way, like in that way? Like, I feel like I would have, if it was me, like, I feel like I would have just left and then been like, well, this is kind of what I'm dealing with, but it's a very personal thing. Like, it would just be for you, just the way in your personal interactions, not realizing there is sort of a whole like sort of subculture out there that are all kind of going through this same sort of thing, and that it matters. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I would also think as you get into the academic world, it probably highlights that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely felt like an oddball sometimes, like in journalism, there weren't a lot of people who had exposure to that world. I mean, there were some, but it's not the most common background. And, I remember even at like one job interview, the interviewer looked at my resume and was like, well, why'd you go to Trinity? Because he kind of knew what it was. And I was like, because I was raised evangelical. I mean, you almost feel like you have to defend yourself for where, the family you were born into.
Well, that's like my friend went to Liberty. If he had graduated, he would have been like, yeah, I went to Liberty, and be like, why'd you go there? That would totally fit that, because you're like, you have no purpose being there. And he probably assumes if you're coming for this job, you're not coming from that world. And
right. Which, arguably it's kind of an inappropriate question. I mean,
Sure,
can you imagine
absolutely.
asking somebody from another religion, asking that question in that way? And I get it that like evangelicalism has been associated with, you couldn't hire a science reporter who was a creationist, but like without even knowing much about me and actually knowing a lot about my work, because I was being interviewed because of my previous work, Yeah, it was kind of a good-natured question, but I knew it was under it, and I did get the
Right.
job, I have to say. And this person is a friend, and I don't resent it, but I relay this anecdote because I think it does sort of illustrate the sense of being like
Different.
having to explain yourself.
Yep.
The point I hadn't considered. I'm sure that came up in more than just an interview. Did you just have a decade of feeling that need to explain yourself to everyone in your community, your surroundings?
Yeah, I felt that a lot. I wanted people to know I was not anti-LGBT and I wasn't a creationist,
Yeah.
and yet I also, there are things about my evangelical background that shaped me and that still shape me and that I'm happy about and proud of. I don't want to make it sound like everything was bad because it wasn't, but
Sure.
it's challenging when you're going through that really private, like you said, Ken, process of going, okay, like who am I? What do I think here? What do I want to hold on to and what do I not? And then people maybe make assumptions about you based on a small
Sure.
detail, like where you went to college,
Sure.
And I think that's a feeling that I was not alone in having. And sort of to answer your other question about that, I mean, I was aware over the course of my life, you meet somebody at a party, you get to talking and you figure out, oh, you go through a few questions and you kind of get to, oh yeah, so-and-so's a pastor's kid, or,
Mhm.
you grew up with that common background, and there can be kind of like a little bit of trauma bonding in the corner.
That's what I was saying.
Sure.
Like to go,
Yeah.
hey, we're all kind of thinking the same things, and like you seem very well adjusted and all that stuff. So good things came from it, from your
Oh, I'm
upbringing.
not, but that's okay.
Right, but you put on a good veneer, like everybody else. You figure out how to at least put on the mask. But it is funny to me that you got in. Were you drawn to journalism? Like
Mhm.
why journalism and sort of that like search for the truth? Also, the X-Files is really good. If you didn't get a chance to watch the X-Files, that's all about searching. The truth is out there.
I've watched a few episodes. I probably should watch
Okay.
more of it.
Okay, there you go. Anyway, but so journalism, if you're like trying to figure out what's what, seems like a good path to go down.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, I didn't do it consciously, I don't think, but the thing I say in retrospect is, the thing that I could not have articulated at the time because I didn't really understand it about myself is I think I was looking for a space where I felt like I could just ask questions and try to just understand which way was up.
Mhm.
Because, there were a lot of ways in which I came to feel that I had been I don't want to say manipulated or lied to because that sounds too strong. I mean, I think the things that like my parents and teachers and pastors taught me were things they really believed.
Yeah.
But I also had the sense that those were sort of things that they felt they had to believe. They were believing them as part of a group rather
Mhm.
than based on, really sort of going, okay, well, does this make sense? I mean, that's my perception of it.
Sure.
I can't, without speaking for them. I mean, a really good example is sort of my coming to terms with science. Like I would see in the library, and kudos to my mom for taking us to the library every summer. Like we had to do the reading list. We had to do the book it pizza club thing. Like
Nice.
Sure.
we
Yeah.
were, that was what we did in the summer. Was we like went to the pool and we read books, and that was like it. There was no camp or any of that. Well, there was occasionally church camp, but we didn't do fancy stuff. We just did that, and it was great. But you go to the library, and every now and then you see something about dinosaurs and evolution, or you go to a science museum, and my parents they took me to the Smithsonian in middle school. And, it's hard unless you truly live in like a box
Yeah.
to not know that there is another idea out there. And my school was talking about evolution, but talking about it as like something that was believed by atheists and scientists who had sort of concocted this idea in order to not have to believe in God and not have to submit to God. They wanted to sin. They wanted to be arrogant in their own wisdom. They wanted to know better. And so they concocted this whole scheme in order to reject God, which, when you're told that, when everybody tells you that, you believe it.
Sure.
But then like when you start to realize that like, oh, well, the Catholic Church has been fine with evolution for like decades. And there are actually a lot of scientists who are religious to one degree or another. There are plenty that aren't.
Mhm.
And also when you come to discover that like there's this overwhelming consensus about this thing.
Right. That's a big, complicated con. They put a lot of effort into this just to get out of having to go to church.
Yeah, that was the question I had. Like when I was back in college, and this person laughed at me for believing dinosaurs. It just immediately was like, what has been planted all over the earth then, and what's in the Smithsonian? And this seems like a lot of effort by a lot of people, and conspiracies usually fall apart pretty quickly. So, I mean, what's the belief there? Like, what were you told is in the Smithsonian?
We were taught that fossils were a result of Noah's flood in the
Oh.
Bible. That they were all
Okay.
laid down by the flood all at once. And that was that. And that
Anyway, moving
carbon
on.
dating wasn't real. I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
it is fundamentally kind of a conspiracy theory, because conspiracy theories, there's always an answer. There's always, you know what I mean? Like
Right.
at
A way to
a certain
spin it.
point, everything fits into it.
Right.
But no, to go back to your original question, I think, Ken, I think I just yearned for the freedom to just sort of like, okay, let's figure out what's really going on here. Don't tell me the conclusion I'm supposed to come to. Like, don't insult my intelligence in that way.
Mhm.
And so journalism, as imperfect as it is, it did feel like a space where at least the ideals of the profession are that you consider multiple perspectives, you try to understand what the other guy thinks, you try to get at the truth as much as you can. And that was really refreshing for me.
Yeah. Corroborate things too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Well, until you had to go to the RNC, of course.
Right.
I'm not commenting
That's
on political parties.
Right.
Earlier on, you had a few points in the book that I don't think you stated it outright, but you mentioned it a number of times, that predominantly like the white evangelical communities were more susceptible to conspiracy theories. And it seemed like it was because they've already made that one giant hurdle, right? So like once they've bought into this closed idea of religion and exactly what that religion is, then all of the little
Explain away all the things.
exactly, right, like in QAnon, how every time something doesn't come to be, the answer is, well, it's part of the plan. You just have to keep believing, like you just have to keep going along with it, and there's always an answer. It's always the way it's supposed to be. Did you see a lot of that early on, or did you like make that connection later?
Yeah, what you're referring to in the book is there's some polling data from the Public Religion Research Institute that sort of showed a correlation between white evangelical identification and sort of uptake of conspiracy theorist ideas.
Yeah.
Just they kind of measured whether or not people agreed with certain statements and looked at the correlations there. And then Ruth Brownstein, who's a sociologist at the University of Connecticut, has written about this too, and some other people have too, that there seems to be just a per capita a larger susceptibility to misinformation, and some of it may have to do with media sources people are consuming. Not to suggest that there isn't misinformation on the left. I think there is. It is a problem.
Sure.
It is a problem across the board in our culture. But there is some
Yes.
data that suggests that, frankly, that white evangelicals are perhaps more susceptible to some of these ideas. Certainly around COVID and vaccines. And again, that might have to do with the universe of information
Sure.
they're taking in. Did
Right.
I see that earlier? I mean, I think I write about the fact that like when Kellyanne Conway, the advisor to former President Trump,
The
went on
alternate facts.
TV and talked about alternative facts, it kind of like hit me in a weird way, because it reminded me of just, this idea that I'd sort of seen growing up again around science sometimes, this idea that, if the facts didn't align with the narrative, you could reject them. And
Right.
I always want to say, and I'm not just saying this to try to be balanced or whatever, but like I think this is a human tendency. It's not just something that evangelicals do, but I saw it manifest in a specific way in my community.
Sure. That makes sense.
It makes sense too, because you're not, if you've been brought up at a fundamental level to not ask too many questions, not keep going, but why? But why? But why this? And why? It's like, no, it's just, it is what it is. That's the way it is. As you grow and become an adult, maybe you lend more that way, because you're like, well, they said this is what it is, so that's what it is. And you then move on about your day. You don't necessarily aren't programmed to say, let me go check that out for myself. Let me go see what's really going on.
And then it would be, it would be exhausting to try to check out everything. Like at a certain point, we trust experts, and we're taught to trust experts, and it's a rational thing to do. Like, this isn't my analogy, but if your car is making a weird sound and you take it to 10 mechanics and 9 out of 10 say it has the same problem, well, you can go do your own research, but like you're probably not going to get anywhere, and you might get hurt. Your car might break down.
Right.
And so, like, which experts do you trust? How do you assess who's an expert? What's a good source of information? Those are all really important questions for sort of like information hygiene. And we all need to think about them in this, particularly in the internet age. But there's a reason, they're fundamentally like assessing who's an expert, assessing who's in a position to have expertise and provide knowledge about a complicated subject is a smart thing to do. It's a rational thing to do. And most of us can't reinvent the wheel about a lot of things that we have to encounter. I mean, this is an incredibly complex world and society, and we all work with technology and make decisions every single day based on things we don't really understand. I mean, I don't know how this computer works,
Sure.
really,
I just
right?
I just trust. I push the button and
Yeah.
it does what it
Yeah.
needs to do.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, I mean, I'm sympathetic to people feeling overwhelmed by like, well, who do I trust? What's true? Which way is up? To a
Yeah.
degree.
I think the human nature point is, you're absolutely right about that too. I mean, I have friends that I trust, even my wife, for example, who's a very intelligent person and a voracious reader and open to everything. Every once in a while, we'll pull up something on our phone and she'll be like, oh my God, can you believe this? And I'm triggered immediately. Like, that doesn't sound right. Where'd you hear that?
Yeah.
You have teenagers, right? So my daughter has Instagram, and so she'll be like, "This is a thing," and I'm like, "Where did you learn that? Did you learn that? Did you learn that from Instagram?" Okay, that's not a credible source. We're gonna move
That's
on.
right. We get our news from TikTok in this household.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
I too have teenagers, so we try to talk about these things, like take everything
Yes.
with a grain of salt,
Yes,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
my kids are good with it for the most part. It's just occasionally, like Aaron said, things leak through, and you're like, "Are we sure about that?" But so to that level, to take it back, also, can you talk a little bit about the textbooks? So you had textbooks with creationism in the actual like textbooks, which to me just blows my mind as a public school educated kid. The idea that you would go to school and have a book like, and I mean, shit, if it's in a textbook for me, that's the real deal,
Mm-hmm.
it would be my impression.
That was one of the most fascinating parts in your book.
And that still goes on
Glossing
today.
over of any bad points of history,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
problematic areas.
Yeah. So as I was sort of conceiving of this book and writing the book proposal, it was always going to be a hybrid of my own memoir and then interviews with other people who'd walked a similar path, both people I know and people I met online. But as I thought about the memoir piece of it, I really wanted to try to figure out a way to make it more than just like, here's what I remember from,
Mhm.
35 years ago. And I'd seen some other people like Chrissy Stroop, who's sort of an Exvangelical writer and academic, talking about this too, about the role of textbooks in shaping ideology. And I thought that textbooks would make a really good way in to sort of as a primary source understand the thinking.
Yeah.
So I went to a bunch of used book sites and just kind of searched by keywords like history and Becca or Bob Jones.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right.
There were two main textbook companies that we used a lot, Bob Jones and Becca, and those books they still produce textbooks. They still to this day are used by a lot of Christian school students and homeschool students, and they
Crazy.
do tend to promote a very conservative creationist worldview. And I quote a lot of the history and social studies texts, which do from my perspective gloss over or minimize things like the horrors of slavery, frankly.
Like saying, fortunately, it was very warm in the South, so they were taken care of.
Right. I mean, that was pretty much a direct quote from one of these books. And
Oh my
I
God.
felt it was important to document this, firsthand. So I found those books to be really helpful in kind of fleshing out the thinking kind of in the words of these textbook writers. And also it helped me kind of refresh my memory about some of the things that I had seen.
Yeah.
Was there anything where you're like, holy crap, I really did learn that? Or there's something that popped through that you're like, something like that was real. I can't believe I didn't think that actually happened, but it actually happened.
Oh yeah. I mean, some of it was, well, like certainly the line about slavery and slaves staying warm and healthy in the sun. I mean, it was like, really?
Right. Or Columbus,
I was gonna say
the
Columbus.
whole
Or
Yeah.
Columbus being sort of
colonialism, yeah.
heralded as a great guy, which I mean, he was, yeah.
Yeah.
So
But I mean, we grew up with that too.
Yeah,
But that's
true.
how the world changes, right? Because we grew up with the same thing. We grew up with the Pilgrims and celebrating Columbus Day. And hey, here's, he sailed the ocean blue and it's amazing. And he was a great guy.
but I bet you weren't being told that America was God's country, that God had
No.
specially ordained. See, and I also quote
Yeah.
the textbooks there.
No.
So alongside this sort of erasure or dismissal of these things, we're also being told that, God had a special hand in the creation of this country, which, feeds right into kind of this Christian nationalist narrative that's really been around for a long time.
Right. Don't you think he's got better things to do
Than design America?
I mean, yeah, seriously.
And I want to be clear, I'm really grateful for a lot of the things, that we have in this country. We're very fortunate in many ways. Many
Oh my
people
God.
would love to come to this country. But
Absolutely.
I think, when you
Yes.
talk about it as if it was founded by God or ordained by God, I mean, Christians, I think, have to be honest about the fact that there's all this other stuff. I mean, I don't think anybody who went to my churches, I hope, And I don't think if you had shown them a line about slaves staying healthy in the warm sun, if you'd said, look, is this really what we believe? Is this okay? I think they would have gone, wait, that's not right. But the fact that it wasn't noticed and rejected, to me, it says a lot.
It's funny with that. Like, I mean, so we grew up in the 90s. And so like, I can remember with like Rage Against the Machine, like as a silly thing, but like for me, when they're like, basically a lot of your culture, a lot of your history is all European culture. Like everything that we learned in our textbooks all focuses on the European influence of things, but doesn't really talk about the indigenous people or the people that were there and all that stuff and the respect for that. And it really is kind of like whoever wins tells the story, right?
For sure.
But it did open my eyes to it. And that whole idea of, you go to school. And so it's the same thing in public school. You could say you're taught what somebody else was taught and, and all that stuff. And now there, of course, there's the Facebook things that are like, here's 10 things you were taught in elementary school that were totally not true, and that comes up a bit. But I guess, in the evangelical world like that, or in that insular world, you at least you say they're coming from the right place in theory, right? So they're trying to help. Right. Everybody's trying to be like,
they're not trying to lie to you.
They're not trying to lie to you to hurt you. They're trying to say, this is just what we believe. And it's so like, I guess cocoons them from it. So looking back, I mean, it's hard to not have some sympathy and say, well, at least I know they were coming from a place. It's not like they were trying to reinstate slavery. It's not like they were like, remember when the slaves had it really good in the South? We should do that. That's not where they're coming from. They're coming from a place of trying to say, we want to help you find God and be better with God and just give you like perspective.
I mean, I think there are those in the Christian nationalist world who continue to say things that are, I think, shockingly
dismissive,
minimizing, dismissive, even condoning of slavery. I don't think that's the majority evangelical view by any stretch of the means, but I don't want to pretend like it's not still out there. So I can't really speak to like what was in the minds of the textbook authors who wrote those textbooks. I don't know. I didn't talk to them.
Sure.
I do think like the average rank and file evangelical parent, like my parents and the parents of my friends, their motivation, as I understood it, was to protect us from a world that does have a lot of problems. I mean, that's how the world is and has always been. They wanted to protect us. They wanted to guide us. They wanted us to believe what they believed was true.
Yeah.
They cared about our futures and also our souls. And so, in that sense, it was motivated by, concern for our well-being, but it's also, I think it's important to understand too, the way that some of these ideas and certainly these textbooks, they promote a certain version or vision of what humans are supposed to be like, what societies and families are supposed to be like. And it's one that puts, frankly, men and mostly white men at the top of the pecking order.
Right.
One of the books, was they showed dad going off to work and mom doing laundry and cooking, it was something along those lines, like very traditional gender roles. And I was looking back at, this was one of the books for early elementary, had like these photos of just sort of portraying really traditional families. And, not that that's a bad way to live, if that's the way you want to live, but, as a little girl reading that stuff, seeing that message over and over again, it sends the implicit message that's like the way you have to be. That's the only option you have. And
stifling.
I've talked to other women who grew up like I did, and I know that I have certainly wrestled with feelings of like, can I really hack it at work? Am I really made for this? Like, I think it produces a lot of those images and that you see as a young person of how the world is supposed to be. They're really powerful.
Yeah, when you're so impressionable.
Yes. So.
Yeah, almost instilling a fundamental insecurity out in the other world, so like if you're there, you're safe, you're home, you're safe. But if you're out in the world working, now you're coming in with this sort of baggage with that. I was just thinking about the Harrison Bucker thing too, where he gave, the speech at the graduation speech where he's like, I'm sure you're all proud of your degrees, but, I'm sure also you would all say that really when you grow up, you just wanted to have a family and that your best place is in the home with the family. And you're like, as much as we can reject that idea, it's still, it's right there. It's not as far away, as we would like it to be, at least that I would like it to be. I want my daughter to do whatever the hell she wants to do.
Right.
Well, have family, you want to have family, be awesome, do whatever.
Yeah. And I mean, the challenge is that I think sometimes it's presented as like either or for women. And I think if you ask almost any woman, myself included, who's done both or it all, I hate that term, having it all. But,
I'm sorry, do you have it all? I didn't know. You're the one?
Apparently
know how
I
she
do.
does it
I
all.
have it
Right.
all. How does she do it all?
Yeah.
Number one, men never get asked that question. And
No, it's
and
true.
I think men struggle to do it all sometimes too, if they're honest. They're just not allowed to say so.
I struggle
Um,
to do half of all. So
right, right.
Right.
And still I think there's this idea in the back of a lot of people's minds, like that women have a sphere and men have a sphere. And so if you are trying to like juggle all these things, I guess it's hard being a working parent no matter what, but I think
Mhm.
we could make a lot more progress in terms of how we support working parents and support the idea that like people have different lives. Some people are going to have kids, some are not. Some are going to have a full-time career, maybe some want to have a part-time career. Like maybe we could have more options. Maybe we could figure out a way to make raising children in this world a little
Easier.
friendlier than it
Right.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't want to veer into policy because that's not what I do, but I think I can say as somebody who has raised two kids, worked full time the whole time, they're both teenagers now. It's not easy, and I have a lot of
Yeah.
support, and I have a lot of resources that not everybody has, and it's still not
Same.
easy. So
Same.
Yeah.
That's real.
We're
I always say
both in
with
the same boat.
our wives work, but I always say with my wife, like I have a job that I've been at for 20 plus years, and so I'm very, I have a lot of freedom to come and
Mhm.
go, and I'm like, I don't understand how people would raise kids if you had a 9 to 5 for an hourly thing that you have to be
Mhm.
there and you have to clock out. You know what I mean? Like that. Like just we extremely hard to have two working parents doing that at the same time and be able to kind of give the kids the upbringing you want. And lots of people are doing it with far less support than my wife and I have, and
Right.
God bless them, and their kids come out adjusted too. So God bless them. But like you said,
Yep.
there are probably ways we could make it easier in life. There's my
Yeah.
soapbox.
Probably. Thanks.
Nice.
So transitioning at the later point, growing up in such an echo chamber, I guess, it shows a high level of intelligence to be able to notice your blind spots and to step away from them. And then I can't even imagine what that's like when, the walls just crumble around you. You say everything that I believed growing up, I'm questioning now. I mean, it's like stepping out of a cult and trying to deprogram someone, you know?
Well, you said you had your grandfather was a big part of that too, right? So you were already seeing some of the on a personal level the cracks in
Yeah, it
that,
seemed
right?
like
Mhm.
he was tearing at that a little bit throughout.
Yeah, he was. So my grandfather is. I kind of weave the story around my life, but really, in many ways, my grandfather's life is kind of an important piece of infrastructure for the book. And he was a really important person. I talk about the fact that he lived in the same town that I did, and we grew up seeing him at like holidays mostly, and occasionally other times. But there was always like this kind of weird distance, and I didn't always know why. I did know that we were, praying for him every night at dinner, praying for him to get saved, as we put it, because he was really one of very, very few people I knew who wasn't a Christian. Like,
Wow.
My whole world was Christian school every day,
All the same
free
church,
school.
like different sects of Christian people.
No, so the school was, there was a statement of faith and you had to sign off on it. And it was a pretty, traditional sort of fundamentalist evangelical statement of faith. The Bible is literally true, believe in personal salvation through Jesus alone, et cetera, et cetera. And everybody had to sign off on that, but people came from different churches. There were,
Okay.
Nazarene church, Bible church, Baptist, one or two, maybe Methodist, although those were kind of like outliers because those are mainline denominations.
Right.
But all pretty conservative Protestant churches for the most part. So
Okay.
that was my school. And then I went to a church that was separate from that. It was a kind of an early mega church, charismatic, sing songs off the overhead projector, raise your hands, close your eyes, speak in tongues, ask for like direct healing by God, not just like pray for somebody in the hospital, but like lay your hands on somebody and pray that they'd be healed, those kinds of things. That was the church that I grew up in. And then when I didn't really go into the book because it's not really important and it would have been distracting, but like that big church that I started off in sort of had a spin-off campus that we switched over to about halfway through my childhood. Still the same like church, brother, sister church, but different campus.
Mm.
So I had sort of exposure to a variety of different sort of strains of evangelicalism. And then I went to college at an evangelical free college, which was a little more organized, a little, it was a denomination, as opposed to a non-denominational situation that was totally unstructured and non-hierarchical, like my church and school had been.
Right.
So, but we all kind of believed, approximately the same things. There was some difference, but mostly on smaller issues, like should you, how should you worship? Should you raise your hands or should you be more sort of restrained?
Right.
That kind of
Talking
thing.
in tongues.
Yeah.
Talking in tongues or not talking.
Yeah.
So baptisms, you did baptisms later, right? So would your grandfather go to the baptisms? Is that like a family thing?
Yeah. So sorry, we were talking about my grandfather. That's how I got on this. And yeah, like that, but those two, the church and the school, those were my world. And we would invite my grandpa occasionally to religious things. He wasn't really into it. There's a scene in the book where I talk about my sister's baby dedication. And my aunt and uncle came to that one. I don't remember my grandpa being at that, but the baby dedication was like an alternative to baptism because, historically, if you study church history for a long, long time, most of Christianity baptized infants. There have been some exceptions. And a lot of the mainline Protestant denominations do too. But like the Anabaptists ushered in the idea that, and I'm not a historian or a religious historian, but we came from the tradition that said you need to believe in Jesus and make a personal decision before you can get baptized. So that which is a relatively newer, in terms of church history, a newer approach. And that's what we did. And so then you would get baptized as a choice when you were like a little older. So I did that at 8 or 9, probably.
Okay.
In a big tub, it's none of this sprinkling stuff. There's a big baptismal in the back pole. Of the, yeah.
You didn't go down by the river?
Well, some people did. I think my parents were baptized in either like a river or a pool. It was before I was born, but I remember them saying that.
We took a vacation randomly to Barbados when my kids were like 4 and 6, I want to say, something like that. But we're down just swimming on a little beach that was across from the Airbnb that my sister had gotten. And all of a sudden, here comes this congregation walking down to the beach, and right in the middle of the people laying out with towels and stuff, and they walked right past them, and people in full suits and the whole thing right into the water. And we watched like 3 or 4 people get baptized, and it was actually pretty cool.
Kids I think it is.
What is going on? I was like, that's really cool. They're choosing to do this thing, and so I thought that was cool. So you mentioned aunts and uncles. Are they also all evangelical and in the same space? Because your grandfather seemed like a bit of a badass, right? Reading about it, like the musician and all that. Did they have a similar relationship? Did he have a similar relationship, I guess, with his other kids?
No, this was on my father's side, and he was really the only one that had sort of become evangelical at a pretty, as a teenager, I think. So we were kind of outliers in that part of the family. Oh,
okay. Interesting. So yeah, like did you pray for your grandfather? Did you pray for your aunts and uncles too?
We did.
Did you have a list of people that was like that you're going through?
We would pray for like the extended family sometimes, but grandpa was always the focus. I don't know why. Maybe because he was the oldest.
He's also the man, right? So he's the patriarchy. So if you're in theory, it could fit that narrative of, the man leading the house.
Yeah.
Trickle down prayer.
So you always had a little bit of a doubt there, right? Because you're like, I like granddad, but why are we not hanging out with him?
Yeah. I just worried about him and the rest of the family, the rest of the extended family. I worried that, that they were going to hell, and I didn't understand why, they didn't want to accept Jesus and go to our church with us. That seemed like the thing that we did, and that was really important in our lives. And so, that was always kind of something that was hard for me to get my head around, because it was presented to me as like very simple, like you just accept Jesus and you go to heaven, and like, why wouldn't everybody want that?
Right. Yeah. I remember this philosophical thing that I saw. It was like a thing. It's like, it's smarter to believe in God, because the possible outcomes, like the rubric of outcomes is like 3 out of the 4 of them end up with you in heaven, either by accident or whatever. And 1 of them ends up with you in hell. Why would you take the chance?
Are you talking about like Pascal's wager?
Maybe that's what it was. Yeah, I don't know.
Pascal's wager was, the philosopher Blaise Pascal, was the idea that you should believe in God as like a bet, because if you're wrong and there's no God, well, then you just die and no big deal. And if you're wrong about not believing in God, then you go to hell or whatever. The problem with that is like, 1, which God are you talking about, and which religion? And 2, does God want you to like pretend that you believe if you don't?
Fake it.
I've always thought that was kind of, it's sort of a mathematical approach
to
something
academic
that isn't,
way, yes.
That is not mathematical. It's mystical. It's spiritual. To me, it demeans the whole thing to talk about it in that way. I understand why he would say that, but I think it demeans the whole thing.
Right. Yeah. Turns it into something very transactional.
Yeah. And I'm not an atheist, I'm just not someone who's like comfortable. And I don't have a problem with atheists. It's just The world to me seems like it's bigger than the material.
Agreed.
But I also get why people don't think that. Like, you can't know that for sure, I don't think, unless you have some mystical experience, but I don't have access to that experience. And anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But as much as I'm equally not on team, there's no God, and I'm also not on team, there is, and I know everything about him,
Right. Here's the playbook.
Yeah.
That's fair. I think that's a safe space to be in. You're questioning everything. This is the part when I really lose everyone. I don't understand where this shift begins. I'm trying not to get into politics yet because, but this leads like directly into it. It's all the notions of, what the rules are for these people, but then the rules tend to change. It's like they keep pushing the goalpost back to kind of meet their current needs. What you talked about in your book with the fundamentalists getting behind Trump and saying, well, he's not ideal. We wouldn't want him as a pastor, but we do want him as a president. We need someone to take charge and to lead, but not necessarily be the ethical choice for us.
Right. Which you did hear a lot and still do.
Yeah. And I can't understand that because there's so much time spent thinking about other people and saving their souls and what's right and what's wrong. But then to put a leader ahead who you think is going to stand there for you, but you're like, you know what? He's a noted liar and he stands against everything we believe in. And he's a misogynist and he said some pretty horrible things and he's got a bad track record, but we're just going to put all our blind faith into this. Where's that line? Like,
what do you see as the justification for it? Like, or in a real way? Why is it so appealing?
I mean, it depends on the person, but so I'm going to broadly characterize what I've heard, but I think I've heard the idea that all politicians are corrupt.
Yeah, I mean, that's the age-old excuse.
Yeah, I mean, but I think it's people believe that, and so they say, well, all politicians are corrupt. They all have their problems, and so fundamentally, it's about picking somebody who aligns with the voters, the evangelical voters, policy goals and ideological vision of the world.
So it's like lesser of two evils almost.
Yeah, I mean,
outcomes, let's say.
But why is the bar so much lower for politics, for politicians as people?
Well, you got to make a decision, right?
I mean, what people would say to me in 2016 was that there was a binary choice. And remember, these are people many of them were very much opposed to abortion.
Mm-hmm.
They saw the Democratic Party as sort of aligned, and they still do, with sort of loose morals when it comes to things like same-sex marriage. I think that battle has mostly been lost by the right, but there's still a sense that the traditional family has eroded and that, LGBTQ people and relationships are sort of not God's design, and this is their view, not mine, to be clear.
Yeah.
But
Mm-hmm.
I'm just trying to explain the perspective. Yeah. So there's this idea that, I mean, a lot of it is about sort of a bigger vision of the world that evangelical Christians believe in and subscribe to and have been working toward for a long time. And they see someone like Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party, or Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, as rowing in the wrong direction, pushing the country toward sort of greater promiscuity, greater inclusion of LGBTQ people, mainstreaming of that. They would use the word lifestyle.
Right.
Obviously supporting abortion rights, so it's a whole package of things that they oppose. One of the things they get asked a lot in the context of abortion is, well, you oppose abortion. Well, what do you want to do for low-income families and for kids who are in need and all of that? And you hear them say, well, the church should do more. It's the church's role to help people and come alongside them, and it's not the role of the government, or it's not the primary role of the government. So it's just it's about a whole philosophy, a whole way of seeing the world that they don't believe. Donald Trump might not be a guy they like very much, or they might like him for certain reasons. But regardless, that's not important. What's important is that they see Trump as someone who will advance their worldview. And I mean, and I in some ways hear the same thing from people who support Joe Biden, but maybe are concerned about his age or his health.
Sure.
They'll say, hey, look, it's not just about Biden. It's about pushing back against Trump and the Trump agenda, and it's about what Biden represents. I mean, people vote for policy in some ways.
That is a really interesting correlation or a comparison that I hadn't really considered, though. Like, because if you say that he's just the figurehead, because what I was going to say, Aaron, is that, like, prior to Trump's election the first time, I would have had all those questions and had the same kind of, how can you possibly bring yourself to vote for this person? I think now going into this election, the real problem, and I'll say it's a problem because I'm not a Trump supporter, is that he delivered on a lot of big things for them, right? So he
absolutely
asked
did.
and answered. And so it's like, even through all the crap, and you can believe the lies and all the terrible things that I'd say he did and all that, there's the big tentpole things that he delivered for the conservative right-wing sort of movement.
No, I was going to say, I mean, there's like a little fight right now about the abortion language in the Republican platform. But, the reality is, someone told me today, look, Trump, I'm paraphrasing here, but essentially he said, Trump got Roe v. Wade overturned. And so the people who care about that issue are already with him. Like, I mean, to your point, he has delivered on a lot of the things they wanted. They believe he can do more. And the other thing, and it's sort of in line with what we were just saying, like when I was in Iowa, I talked to a pastor who said, look, Trump says things I wouldn't say. And I've heard some version of this from other people too, but he said, Trump says things I wouldn't say, but he's a fighter, and we need a fighter in the political arena. They see our culture as in decline, as, and there are a lot of problems. I mean, if you want to look for problems in our country, you can find them easily. And they attribute those to, I think, a decline in sort of Christian dominance. That's what they see as the cause. And when you believe that, when you're invested in that idea, well, a lot of other things flow from that.
Right.
Gotcha.
So you talked about it at the very beginning of the book too, about covering Trump, like on the trail and like being in the press pit around.
Did you ask for that position, or did they just say, here you go?
Well, what happened was I was hired. I mean, it was really like soon after Trump had announced, and there was a huge, I'm sure you remember, a huge Republican primary field that year. So I was initially just assigned to the primary and was kind of bouncing around different candidates, going to different events. I actually wasn't spending a lot of time with Trump early on at all. And I think, the conventional wisdom was that his campaign was not probably likely to
peter out eventually.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, I went to I went to one of his rallies just like right around the time I was hired. And then I don't think I went to another one for a few months because I spent a lot more time with people like Carly Fiorina and Ben Carson and Ted Cruz, a little bit with Marco Rubio. There were all these other candidates, but it obviously eventually became clear that he was the likely nominee and then the nominee, and so I had just been assigned to the Republican primary and kind of in many ways fell into covering him.
Sure. Yeah, we bubbled up,
and I've always theorized. No one ever told me this, but I've always assumed that I was given that assignment because, at the beginning of that campaign, everyone thought it was Hillary Clinton's year to lose.
Anointed.
And so, I assumed they had assigned the less experienced newbie to the campaign that would be less important, but obviously things didn't go that way. So
how did you adapt when, he points the finger at you and everyone in the room turns around and says, you're the bad guy?
I mean, it wasn't just me. It was the whole
I'm saying the collective.
You collectively, yes.
Yes.
I know, but I just want to be clear about that.
I just assumed you meant you.
just me.
Right.
It was a little weird to get used to that. As I mentioned, I'd been with a lot of candidates, Republican candidates, and I mean, it's not unusual for candidates to take jabs at the press. I remember Bernie Sanders was running that year on the Democratic side, and he would complain about his press coverage. Ted Cruz had like a line in his stump speech where he would sort of jokingly kind of gloat. Is there such a thing as anticipatory gloating? Because it was like gloating.
I'm getting ready to gloat.
Hypothetical gloating about like when I win. There was this line about like how all the journalists and the media and the editors were something about how they were gonna have such a hard time with it or something. I used to be able to quote it word for word, but it's been a while. Yeah. So it wasn't like it was unique to Trump to criticize the press. It wasn't like it was unique to Republicans to criticize the press, but Trump did it in a particularly kind of
less smarmy and more
pointed, vociferous way, aggressive way. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he would sort of rile up the crowd in a way that was, sometimes frightening.
Yeah, sure.
So
after a while, did it just sort of kind of seem like the greatest hits though?
It did. And, there were some rallies that got a little violent or, chaotic, either inside or outside the arenas. And those were, there were some protests where police got involved and that kind of thing. And so there was a period there in the 2016 campaign when I don't think any of us were going to the rallies alone. We were taking a buddy, just in case things got uncomfortable.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, obviously that was unpleasant, and it was concerning, just from the standpoint of the press. Whatever you think of your coverage is an important part of a democratic society.
I don't know about that. Like that became a narrative, right? It's like, do we need the press to be a part of a democratic society? And you have to suddenly be justifying that. I remember that coming out of his election and saying, no, the press is really important. We need to have the press. You need more access, more press access, not less.
Right.
Again, it's like science.
Right. No, I mean,
But if you were covering Ben Carson, would you have had the same sort of, let me make sure that I have somebody with me just in case it gets a little hairy? Because I'm picturing probably people were falling asleep at that.
No, that was unique to that campaign.
Yeah, it feels problematic, let's say. And then you're saying, Aaron, about the greatest hits, but I'm saying you keep having to go into this and you know what you're getting into and you know how the crowd could be, right? And it's all, I don't know, as a person just sitting there in that space and you're outnumbered, you're like, it's all fine until it's not fine, right? I'm sure you had incidences where you had to leave quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't love talking about this because I really don't want it to be about me.
Sure.
I mean, I was doing my job. That was part of the job. It's unfortunate that it was part of the job, but it was at that time.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't, but you became part of the story though, too, honestly, which is a weird spot.
Yes. I mean, the press did become part of the story. That's true.
Right.
I went to my first Trump rally in several years about a month ago, and it was kind of the same, the greatest hits, and he talks about the press, but the people at that particular rally that I talked to seem to be in pretty good spirits. I think they're feeling confident.
Sure. Did they watch the debate?
I
guess the debate hadn't happened. Yeah. So yeah. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah.
I have a lot of strong feelings about that.
As do
issues around that. Anyway,
I don't want to go off the rails here and get into a bunch of Trump politics. So let's step back a second. When you were in journalism, you left ag. Where were you living at that time? Was it in Kansas? Did you say?
Nebraska.
What was the jump to politics? Or to NPR, I guess.
I had been at an NPR station in Nebraska covering agriculture and environmental issues.
Yeah.
As a public radio reporter in Nebraska, because those are big issues there. That was the bread and butter of the economy.
Sure.
I did some other stories that were in, other areas. I mentioned we had a small staff, so I had some latitude to do other things, but that was my big focus. So I did, stories about the ag economy and water policy and farm bill debates and all that good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
My next move was to Iowa, one state over. Iowa is also a farm state. And so it seemed like an easy move, but I wanted to go there for a couple of reasons. One, they had a host position open.
Cool.
And personally, it was also just like a good time. I was the morning host, so I was able to.
Radio or TV?
Still radio, all radio. This was Iowa Public Radio. I still got to, to get up early, or I had to get up early. I didn't get much sleep, but I got to come home early and be home with my little boy, who was a toddler at the time. And then I had another one there.
Gotcha.
And so that was part of the appeal for me. And one nice thing about Iowa was it was also a really is important political state. And I was interested in politics.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like the primary reason I moved there or anything, but it was, it was a nice bonus, created some opportunities. So during the 2012 election cycle, I filed a lot of stories for the network for NPR about the caucuses. And then also at that time, Iowa was a little bit of a purple state, even though it's a small state. There was, both sides were coming there to campaign. Obama and Romney were both coming there. And so, I just did a lot of political stories that year, kind of got on the radar of the Washington desk. And then 4 years later, or 3 years later, when they were getting ready for the 2016 team, I was asked to apply for a position on that team and wound up getting it. So that's how I wound up at NPR. And I should say, if you care,
in Washington.
In between, I briefly went to Georgia because I kind of had given up on going to NPR. And so I went to Georgia, which was great. But then I got recruited to the network. So
gotcha.
Given up because you didn't think the opportunity was there, or
Yeah.
you were looking for something different?
No, I just didn't think it was going to happen for me for a bunch of reasons. So
Oh.
I decided I was ready for a change and decided to take an opportunity that came along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then they're like, great, we're glad to have you here. Why don't you go cover this candidate, Donald Trump?
Pretty much.
Yeah. So that was what I was wondering next. I mean, that's feet to the fire. That had to be quite different. I mean, how did you adjust to that? Like, did you have time before that campaign to work in DC?
I had not, well, I had spent some time in DC. I was a Senate page in high school for a year, and I'd done a couple internships in DC. So I'd spent a little time here, but
Uh-huh.
I had never been here full time as a journalist before. So that was new.
How'd you feel about living in DC versus a rural state?
I've actually never lived in DC full time. I still don't. I have always kind of had like a pied a terre, or, rented a room from a friend, or
Sure.
now I'm remarried and my spouse also has kind of a DC based job, but we both are able to work remotely a lot. So we kind of split our time now.
Okay.
And honestly, like I'm kind of grateful for that. I think it's helpful to have kind of 2 feet in the outside world. I think it's part of the reason I was recruited to come here. The person who recruited me said that there was a desire for some people outside the Beltway. And
Sure.
I think having the sensibility of outside the Beltway is valuable because that's where most voters live. I still do, spend maybe about a week a month in Washington. And I really enjoy being here to, sort of check in with my colleagues. And
Yeah.
I work with some really good people. And I just find it valuable too to be in the office some of the time.
Yeah, get some FaceTime.
Yeah. But I've never fully felt like I'm not a full creature of Washington, and there are good and bad things about that. I sometimes wish I knew this world a little bit better than I do, but
Mhm.
I also feel like there's a lot of value in just having a life
Yeah.
in just an ordinary place, which I've always had.
Where's home base now?
Southern Virginia.
Okay. Nice. Yeah, that's a bit of a hike from DC.
Yeah, the train helps.
Oh.
Or my husband and I carpool a lot too. We take turns. Well, we don't take turns. He drives. I sleep.
Right.
I was gonna say, you must really like each other. I don't know if I could carpool with my wife.
Oh, I'm gonna tell her. No, we do like each other.
I think she's going to tell you.
Right.
No, we do
Gotcha.
like each other, and I don't know. It's nice that we have this. He was in DC for a long time before we were together, and so I think he likes having like a life outside DC. Is kind of fun for him, and
Sure.
and it's nice for me to have a little bit more of like a place here that feels a little more rooted. So we kind of blended our lives, and that's been really nice too.
Yeah, you can step away from work a bit.
Family stuff too,
Yeah.
Although I will say, I always wish that I like to be a young parent in DC where you could take the kids to the Smithsonian like all the time. I feel like that would have just lived there.
I know. And I'm not raising my kids here. And so I bring them periodically. Newsflash, their kids, they don't appreciate anything that they have, including the proximity to DC. But
I've taken my kids to DC plenty of times, and they love the ice cream truck outside of the Smithsonian.
Right. Exactly. 100%. 100%. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. It's running late. I don't want to hold you all day. So I'm going to jump ahead to the way we usually wrap up. So we'd like to know where somebody comes from and where they call home, which are often 2 different places. At this point, what's home to you? If you were to go back to somewhere, is that where you are now? Is that one of the places that you lived previously? Is that DC? Like what's...
At the moment, it's Virginia.
Okay.
That's where my kids are. So that's home.
Yeah.
Sure.
I've moved around a lot my whole life. I probably don't see myself moving back to the Midwest, as dear as it still is to me. I don't see myself moving back there.
Is your family still in Kansas City for the most part?
Some are, some aren't.
Yeah.
I I said this to my kids, and my 13-year-old son said, "Mom, that's such a like middle-aged white woman thing to say." But every time I go to Europe, I love it so much. I feel in some ways more at home there than anywhere. And, that is my ancestry. It'll shock you to hear.
I couldn't tell.
My most recent ancestry is my great grandfather from Italy, actually. And I looked into trying to get Italian citizenship, but I can't because he he naturalized before my grandmother was born. If he had naturalized after, I could have. So, I love old architecture, and I think that's the biggest thing. And I mean, who doesn't love like the culture of, I love third spaces, right? Like there's such a value on having places where people can sit and drink coffee and be together.
Mhm.
And, like my husband and I were just in France for a wedding, and we stayed in a friend's apartment, and it was teensy, but I didn't care because it was so, we just walked everywhere, and there was all this beautiful old architecture around us. And, we spent half of our day just like figuring out where to get a croissant. And,
You're spending your day in the apartment. You're not doing it right anyway.
right. So like,
Right.
I think like someday when my kids are older, like I have a dream of maybe like way downsizing and just finding like a little tiny place in a rural place and somewhere in Europe, and spending a lot of time there if they, as long as I can get a visa.
I love
Right.
that dream. I very much want the same things. So hold on. The second half of this question, actually,
But
you've led into it
can
perfectly.
I just say one more thing about that though? But the
Yes.
downside of that is I do have children, and I would miss them, and home, it's never home if they're not there. So
Yeah.
and that's my fantasy, but I don't know if it will actually happen. Anyway.
Right. Because then hopefully you have grandkids and you're like, well, I
Yeah.
need to be near the
Right.
grandkids. And I need
Right.
to
Yeah.
have a place. We always talk about like people downsizing. I'm like, well, I want to have a house still that people can come and stay and be a place that they'll gather and come to.
Maybe you can own the apartment next door.
Yeah, there we
There we
go.
go.
There we go.
So the second half of that was, we want a tour of your home. We're coming to visit for a day. What's the agenda?
Not our home. Not our home. The
Not your
hometown.
home,
Like,
your hometown.
I want a
But-
tour of our house.
Right. So, would you rather host someone in your ideal day in Virginia, or, a city in Europe?
Like go
Oh.
around and show somebody around.
At this point in my life, in Virginia, because that's what I know, and that's
Yeah.
authentic
Okay.
for me. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
I would love, if we're ever both in the Riviera at the same time, let's go get coffee. But I would feel a little pretentious for me to be like, let
Sure.
me host you in the Riviera.
Now I have to do that. That's going to be a life goal to just pick some place random.
I've never been here,
Please.
but I read
I've
about.
never been. Let
Right,
me,
no, it's-
let me show you around.
No, in Norfolk where I live, I mean, we would probably like start the day with one of my favorite coffee shops. I do live in, thankfully, a very walkable neighborhood, and like
Nice.
every day my husband and I go for a walk in the morning and get coffee.
Oh, that's cool.
That's like our little ritual.
Love it. What kind of coffee?
Dark roast with the almond milk or skim.
Okay.
Mm.
I only
And-
do almond milk because like I did Weight Watchers and it was like the lowest point, so I still do that.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
So or WW as it's called now.
Oh,
Did
weird.
they change that? Is that not a thing anymore? Weight Watcher is now WW.
It's not Weight Watchers, it's WW.
Can it be
Yeah.
W squared?
Yeah,
It's-
that really
I-
rolls off the tongue.
I feel like it's such a like 90s way, but I totally swear by it because all it does is it basically makes you prioritize like
Yeah.
unprocessed food. That's basically what it is.
That's a good idea.
What else? Oh, and then I mean, it's on the water, or not. I don't live on the
Yeah.
water, but it's coastal Virginia, so I would probably go to the beach for a little while. There's a great state park down there that is wonderful for hiking, walking, and you can like, do a picnic there and then go sit on the beach or swim if
Nice.
it's warm. And then there's a great museum in Norfolk called the Chrysler Museum of Art, which is
I only go to museums with arcs. So
with arcs.
That have arc
it's a bad religious
references.
joke.
I like any city I go to, like if I have more than a day or two, it's always I live for that. Just like walking, finding good coffee,
Yeah.
popping into the art museum. That's like I could do that for days. So that's what I do when friends come.
Okay. What is the museum that you mentioned?
It's called the Chrysler.
Uh-huh.
It's like the auto company, but I don't know if it's named for the same people or not.
Right.
And they have, and don't ask me like what their expertise is. I'm not smart like that. They have a variety of types of art. They have cool
You
exhibits,
can
like
go there and it's pretty things. And
it's
cool
pretty things to look at. They have a great blown glass museum, which is kind of cool.
Mm.
And then like the Beatles, Paul McCartney's photo exhibit, if you heard about that,
I just read about it. Yeah.
it started there in North America, believe it or not. That was its
Really?
first stop, even before New York. Yeah.
Wow.
So they get some good stuff through. And I just like to go in and browse and kind of space out. So
Nice.
Very cool. How about where are you eating?
where am I eating?
What kind of food are we getting?
Yeah. Gotta eat during the day, right?
Right, we got to eat somewhere or dinner or whatever.
Does Weight Watchers allow you to go out to dinner?
All right, is
Yeah,
that not a
oh,
thing?
for sure, for sure.
Do I have to count points?
No, I don't really do that anymore. I just
Okay,
use it as
good.
like a barometer of like whatever.
Yeah.
In Norfolk, honestly, like there's a lot of good restaurants, but like my favorite ones are still in DC. Gosh, that's gonna sound so snobby, but like
That's such a middle-aged white woman thing to say.
it is. There's actually a really good barbecue place in
Ooh.
Norfolk that
Okay.
like sells out every day at like 6:00 called,
Nice.
yeah. Do you want me to say the name or is that?
Yeah.
It's called Redwood.
Redwood.
And
cool.
yeah, and it's like we always go there and go like, we're going to go to Redwood if they have food.
Oh my God, really? It's one of
Mhm.
those?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And they just close up. They don't buy more. They just close when they're done. That's it.
Those are the best kind of barbecue places.
It's true.
Mhm.
Yeah, we've been to a
It's
few
true.
of them. Do you drink?
Sometimes
wine,
less
cocktails.
now that I'm over 40.
Same.
That's fair.
Mhm.
Yeah. What's your go-to
Mm,
drink of choice?
gin and tonic if I want a mixed drink. I used to be more of a red wine girl, but now I like rosé. It's
Mm,
just it's a little milder, I think.
yeah,
Yeah.
a little lighter.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it used to be very much a beer guy and a beer snob and all that stuff. But now as I've gotten older, I realized that I'm like, I can drink white wine, like kind of forever, and be able to be like good and still function like the next day. And my body's like, okay, we're good. We can still move through the universe. Whereas like, if I have, 2 or 3 big beers, I'm like, no, next day I'm like, oh, can't get up with the kids, got to do all stuff.
Yeah, I think this is more of like a woman thing because our bodies change at a different time in a different way than men's. But like there's like this cliche about turning 40 and not being able to drink anymore. And it was totally true for me. It was like something happened when I turned 40 and it's like one is enough. I have a headache the next morning if I go beyond that. But that's not a bad thing. Like
Right.
to me, it's just like an incentive drinking less is a healthy thing. So I usually, a lot of times I'll split a cocktail with my husband and then I get like a club soda with lime, which, oh God, I am such a middle-aged white woman. What on earth? My son was right.
Yes.
By the way, if that was my son, he would have gone, what the Sigma? Like
The Sigma.
I don't know. It's this random thing. The kids, they talk crazy. I don't know. I don't know how to describe it any other way.
Yeah, my daughter's just getting into that.
Anyway.
Everything is ish.
Oh, yeah. Meh. It's very mid.
Yeah, mid. That's the one.
Yeah. Gin and tonic is a fantastic, though, summertime drink. Although
Yeah,
I did
it
have
is.
That's what I
one,
would
I
lean
did have
toward.
one at a party and my friend handed it to me and it was sort of a orangey color. And I was like,
What?
That's different. And he's like, I added a dash of orange juice to it to like do that. And I was like, well, it's probably not a gin and tonic anymore. It's probably something else. But I will say this, it was lovely. It was fantastic. It was
I've
very
never
good.
heard of that, but no, that sounds good. I mean, because
Yeah, it was good.
the tonic is kind of a
Yeah.
citrusy vibe.
Yeah, it's
and
already
the
got
gin's,
that kind of in there.
gin is what made out of juniper, but it has
Mhm.
that kind
It's like
of, also
sweet.
that kind of, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep. There's a sweetness to it. So it's good.
Yeah, bitterness.
Yeah. So I would recommend that too.
I'll file that away.
Yes. With barbecue and weird gin and tonics.
I love it. That sounds like a great day. There's nothing I love more than just like wandering around a city. I used to travel a lot for work, and that was like my go-to. Was just put my stuff down, walk everywhere, find the weirdest things I can find, places to drink and eat. So that's what we try to promote on here too. That's why we want names of things.
Oh, I love it. I mean, my husband and I say that like basically we just like walk and on vacation, we walk until we can justify like another snack.
Yes.
Right.
Walk,
We burn
snack,
it
walk,
ourselves.
snack. Yeah.
It was the
Yeah.
perfect
Exactly.
way to
Long
travel.
enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool.
All right. We won't hold you anymore.
Yeah.
Thank you. This was enjoyable. I really
It was
appreciate it.
really fun talking to you. Yeah, definitely.
Good. Well, thank you both. It was fun talking to you. I've never had
And-
those questions at the end before, but
Well,
I like them. They're
like I
fun.
said, you didn't look us up. So
Yeah. Right.
that's a good thing.
When
That's
you
my
take off
fault.
to North Carolina.
Tomorrow.
Okay.
And then
Very
to
good.
Milwaukee on Saturday. So
Good luck.
Very
Yeah.
good one.
Yep,
Safe
yep,
travels. Enjoy the festival.
thanks so much.
Yeah.
It's good
All right.
talking to you both.